What happens when the ultimate dream of a $50 million windfall suddenly transforms into a cold, clinical nightmare of litigation? How do you maintain your sanity when the very people who shared your childhood dinner table become the predatory architects of your financial ruin? And if you discovered that your entire future was predicated on a lie hidden in plain sight, would you have the strength to fight for what was promised, or would you fold under the weight of a secret designed to destroy you? Today, we are exploring the harrowing case of the Sterling estate, a labyrinth of wealth, deception, and a discovery that redefined the meaning of blood ties. Stay with us until the very end, because the resolution of this case contains a profound, surprising lesson about the true nature of inheritance that you cannot afford to miss. Welcome to Legal Wins USA. We bring you powerful stories and legal cases just like this one, insightful narratives designed to empower and inform you. Don't forget to subscribe for more. For Julian Sterling, the morning of October 14th felt like the first day of the rest of his life. His father, the legendary and reclusive real estate magnate Arthur Sterling, had passed away 3 months prior, leaving behind a portfolio of Manhattan high-rises and offshore haunts that most people only see in cinematic fiction. The preliminary reading of the will had been straightforward, almost boringly so. As the only son and the designated primary beneficiary, Julian was poised to step into a $50 million inheritance. It was a sum meant to cement his legacy and provide a lifetime of security. The probate process seemed like a mere formality, a series of stamps and signatures handled by white-glove law firms in mahogany row offices. Julian had already begun planning the expansion of the family's philanthropic foundation, envisioning a future of prestige and influence. But as the final verification of the Irrevocable Trust began, a junior clerk in a boutique forensic accounting firm noticed a microscopic discrepancy in a filing from 30 years ago. It was a single digital footprint that shouldn't have existed. In an instant, the golden gates of the Sterling Empire didn't just creak, they slammed shut. The $50 million wasn't just being delayed, it was being vaporized by a legal reality no one saw coming.
To understand the magnitude of the Sterling collapse, one must first understand the man who built the mountain. Arthur Sterling was a figure of singular, almost terrifying ambition. Rising from the grit of post-war Brooklyn, he possessed an uncanny ability to see value where others saw urban decay. He didn't just buy buildings, he acquired history, assembling a portfolio that functioned as a private fiefdom. By the late 1990s, Arthur was a titan of industry, a man whose word was law and whose handshake was considered more binding than a notarized contract. He raised Julian in an environment of filtered sunlight and high expectations, grooming him to be the steward of a dynastic fortune. To the outside world, the Sterlings were the embodiment of the American dream, refined by old-world elegance. However, beneath the veneer of charitable galas and architectural triumphs, the foundation of the Sterling wealth was built on a complex web of fiduciary structures designed to be impenetrable. Arthur was obsessed with asset protection, often famously remarking that a fortune is only as strong as the walls built around it. He utilized every tool in the legal arsenal, from multi-layered limited liability companies to complex offshore vehicles, all intended to shield the $50 million from the prying eyes of creditors and the heavy hand of the state. Julian grew up believing that this fortress was his birthright, a sanctuary of capital that would never fail. He saw his father as an infallible architect of legacy, a man who had calculated every risk and accounted for every variable. But the origin of this wealth was tied to a period of aggressive expansion in the mid-80s, a time of deregulation and high-stakes gambling in the commercial sector. It was during this era of rapid accumulation that Arthur made a choice, a pivot in the shadows that he believed would be buried forever. He assumed that time would erode any evidence of the initial seed capital, leaving only the pristine wealth for his heir to enjoy. He didn't account for the digital evolution of forensic auditing or the relentless memory of a paper trail that leads back to the very first brick laid in his empire. As the investigators dug deeper into the history of the initial seed capital, they found that the Sterling millions weren't just the result of hard work and market timing. They were the product of a ghost, a silent partner whose existence had been scrubbed from the official record, yet whose legal claim to the estate remained an undetonated landmine buried beneath the family office.
The first crack in the fortress appeared during a routine audit of the Sterling Irrevocable Trust, a document that had long been considered the untouchable centerpiece of Julian's inheritance. While Julian's legal team was preparing the final distribution schedules, they were served with a motion to stay that felt like a physical blow. A rival firm, representing a claimant whose name had never appeared in any family ledger, presented a document that turned the probate court into a battlefield. It was a secret clause, a codicil buried within a dormant holding company registered in the British Virgin Islands. This wasn't just a minor amendment, it was a legal kill switch. The clause stipulated that the entire $50 million corpus was contingent upon the satisfaction of a private debt, a massive unrecorded liability owed to a shadow entity known only as the Valerius Group. As the forensic accountants peeled back the layers of the Sterling corporate veil, they discovered that Arthur had not been the sole architect of his success. The Valerius Group had provided the initial high-risk capital that allowed Arthur to acquire his first major Manhattan skyscraper. But the price of that capital was a perpetual equity stake that Arthur had spent 3 decades trying to hide. This secret clause stated that upon Arthur's death, the Valerius Group held a right of first refusal and a senior lien that superseded all other beneficiary claims. Julian watched in horror as the definition of his inheritance shifted from a liquid fortune to a disputed liability. His father's meticulous estate planning, which Julian had praised as a masterclass in wealth preservation, was revealed to be a desperate shell game. The legal team at the estate was paralyzed. They were dealing with a fiduciary duty conflict of interest that threatened to swallow the firm whole. If the Valerius claim was valid, Julian wasn't just losing his inheritance, he was potentially liable for years of unpaid dividends and interest that could exceed the value of the estate itself. The mystery deepened when the identity of the person behind the Valerius Group began to surface through a series of cryptic filings. This wasn't a corporate takeover, it was a personal vendetta. The claimant wasn't a bank or a hedge fund, but a person from Arthur's past who had been strategically erased from the family history. As the news of the secret clause leaked to the financial press, Julian realized that the man he called father had spent his entire life playing a high-stakes game of poker with a deck that was stacked against his own son. The $50 million was no longer a gift, it was the bait in a trap that had been set 30 years ago.
The revelation of the Valerius Group didn't just destabilize the estate, it tore the Sterling family apart at the seams. As the litigation intensified, Julian discovered that he wasn't the only one who had been kept in the dark. His mother, Eleanor, who had lived a life of sheltered luxury in their Upper East Side penthouse, was suddenly served with a subpoena that threatened to strip her of her marital assets. The betrayal was no longer just financial, it was deeply personal. In a dramatic deposition that lasted 12 hours, the true identity of the Valerius claimant was finally unmasked. It was Sarah Vance, a woman whom Arthur had once called his most trusted advisor, and his secret first wife. The legal implications were catastrophic. If the first marriage had never been legally dissolved, the entire structure of the Sterling Trust was built on a fraudulent foundation. The validity of Arthur's second marriage to Eleanor was called into question, and with it, Julian's standing as the primary heir. This was the peak of the family conflict, a moment where the prestige of the Sterling name was dragged through the mud of public record. Siblings from the first marriage, children Julian never knew existed, emerged from the shadows to file their own claims, citing a breach of fiduciary duty by Arthur that spanned decades. The emotional toll was visible on Julian's face as he sat in the courtroom, watching his father's legacy be dismantled by the very people he had marginalized. The betrayal felt like a recurring theme, a father who loved his capital more than his kin, and a son who was merely a placeholder for a fortune that belonged to ghosts. Julian's own legal team began to pivot, sensing that the case was becoming a lost cause. They advised him to settle, to take a fraction of the $50 million and walk away before the estate taxes and legal fees consumed everything. But Julian was driven by a desperate need for the truth. He began his own investigation, looking for the one thing his father never thought anyone would find, the proof of the dissolution of the first marriage. He spent nights in dusty archives, tracing the movements of a man who had spent a lifetime covering his tracks. The family home, once a symbol of stability, became a hollow shell filled with the echoes of unspoken secrets. Every conversation with his mother was now filtered through the lens of legal strategy, and the once unbreakable bond of the Sterling family was replaced by a cold, calculating mutual suspicion. They weren't a family anymore. They were a collection of litigants fighting over the remains of a dead man's lies.
The final showdown took place in a crowded probate court in Lower Manhattan, a room where the air was thick with the scent of old paper and the palpable tension of a $50 million cliffhanger. Sarah Vance's legal team presented a compelling narrative of a woman wronged, a silent partner who had been systematically erased from the annals of a real estate empire. They demanded the total liquidation of the Sterling Trust to satisfy the outstanding debt and the recognition of the prior marital claim. It seemed for several grueling weeks that Julian was destined for a total wipeout. However, the resolution came not from a grand oratorical flourish, but from a forgotten safety deposit box in a small bank in Zurich, the key to which Julian had found taped behind a portrait of his father in the library. Inside was not more money, but a single ironclad document, a signed and witnessed mutual release agreement from 1989. In it, Sarah Vance had accepted a significant private settlement in exchange for waiving all future claims against the Sterling estate and its heirs, specifically acknowledging the legality of Arthur's subsequent marriage. But there was a twist that even Julian hadn't anticipated. The document also contained a secondary clause, a poison pill that Arthur had installed as a final act of cold-blooded genius. If any party attempted to challenge the trust based on prior claims, the $50 million would not go to Julian or Sarah, but would be instantly diverted to a charitable trust for the preservation of public parks, leaving both sides with nothing but their legal bills. The judge, after a meticulous review of the Swiss documents, delivered a verdict that sent shockwaves through the gallery. The Valerius claim was dismissed with prejudice due to the signed waiver, but because Julian had been forced to reveal the existence of the poison pill to defend the estate, the trigger had been pulled. The court ruled that the inheritance was to be transferred to the public trust as per Arthur's draconian instructions. Julian had won the legal battle against his father's past, only to realize that his father had designed the game so that no one, not even his own son, could truly win. The $50 million evaporated into the public sector, leaving the Sterling family with their names, their memories, and an empty bank account. The resolution was a clinical demonstration of the law's indifference to emotion. The documents were valid, the intent was clear, and the outcome was absolute.
The empty halls of the Sterling estate now serve as a silent monument to a fortune that existed only as a digital ghost. This case remains one of the most studied examples in probate law, not because of the wealth involved, but because of the terrifying precision of the legal instruments used to control it from beyond the grave. The karna of Arthur Sterling was a self-fulfilling prophecy. He was so consumed by the fear of losing control that he created a system where control was maintained at the cost of his family's future. Julian Sterling, once the prince of a real estate empire, now works as a consultant for high-net-worth estate planning, using his story as a cautionary tale for those who believe that money is the ultimate shield. The evergreen financial lesson here is profound and unsettling. Wealth without transparency is merely a debt waiting to be collected. In the world of Tier 1 finance and estate law, the technicalities of a trust or the wording of a fiduciary agreement are not just administrative details, they are the DNA of your legacy. If you build your house on the shifting sands of secrets and predatory clauses, you cannot be surprised when the tide of the law eventually comes to reclaim it. True inheritance is not just the transfer of capital, but the transfer of a clean title, both legally and morally. The $50 million that Julian thought he won was never truly his because it was tethered to a lie that demanded payment in full. As you look at your own financial planning and the legacy you wish to leave, remember the Sterling case. Ensure that your documents reflect your true intentions and that your advisors are building bridges, not traps. The law is a powerful tool for protection, but when used as a weapon of deception, it inevitably turns on the hand that wields it. The most valuable asset you can inherit is a history that doesn't require a forensic accountant to verify. In the end, Julian found a different kind of wealth, the freedom of starting over without the shadow of his father's sins looming over every dollar he earned. It was a victory, but it was one that cost him everything he thought he wanted, proving that sometimes the only way to win a rigged game is to let the prize go.